Today I'm going to show you one of the most powerful sequencing techniques that I've ever discovered. It is called hocketing. This technique allows you to take individual notes or so-called voices from a specific sequencer and distributes that along multiple tracks and multiple synths, giving you really interesting results. Here's a little drum groove that I put together just to have a bit of a rhythmic foundation. And now let's say we want to generate some kind of a sequence of melodies, something that goes along well with this drum groove. So the first thing you want to do is create a MIDI track. I'm going to give this a slightly bluish color and call it Send. I'll explain in a second why. Now on this MIDI track, you want to load up any sequencer, anything that can generate you MIDI notes. And personally, I prefer using the MDD Snake sequencer by Max for Live, which is also for free, because it allows you to take control of each and every single note, which can be pretty important for melodies. After this sequencer, you want to be able to send the MIDI files across multiple tracks, and therefore you need this Hocket 2 device. We're just going to drop it right here after the sequencer, and by default the voices are set to 1. How about let's change it to 1, 2, 3, 4, so it sends 4 different voices out to 4 different tracks. I am now going to create another MIDI track, call this Receive. And then I'm going to take another Hocket 2 device and place it right in front of the chain. I'm also going to delete any other effects that I have loaded by default onto this track. And we're going to set it to Receive. Now we're going to duplicate this track once, twice, 3 times. So we have a total of 4 different voices, 4 different tracks, because we've set that in the beginning here. The first track, we're going to leave it on 1. The second track, we're going to put it to 2. The third track, we're going to put it to 3. And the fourth track, we're going to put it to 4. So now our Hocket device, which is sending over the voices, is sending it over to these 4 individual tracks. Here's where the fun part comes in. Now you can choose any synth of your liking. I'm going to choose Diva because that's my favorite synth. And I'm going to load this Diva onto the first layer. I'm going to choose a preset that I like, preferably a short and plucky one just to get something started. For example, this one. And now if we hit play, it starts sending notes to that synthesizer. What you want to do is then duplicate your Diva across all these individual layers. And the cool thing is that you don't necessarily need to use Diva for every layer. You can also use different synths, which makes it really interesting to combine different synths and different tonalities. If we play all those layers together, this is how it sounds. So it's basically triggering the sequence of notes and sending it to these 4 tracks over here. And if we want to make it a bit more melodically pleasing, we're going to have to tweak the sequencer a bit more. So what I usually like to do is select a scale first. So right now it's set to C major. Let's go for C minor. Still sounds pretty random, so how can we change it a bit? So we can set the randomness range of the individual notes here. Or you could also just randomize every single parameter here by just clicking this random all. You can see that it also randomizes the gate, which means that it'll turn off certain notes and leave on certain notes, giving you a bit more melodic variation. You can also change the velocity over here, so some notes are softer, some notes are played harder. And the cool thing is that you can now dial in on every single one of your layers. And let's say you want to change the preset. You want to use a completely different preset on layer 2. That is amazing. It's still using this sequencer as the foundation, and it's just spreading those notes across multiple tracks. So we get a sound that sounds cohesive because we're using one sequencer, but we're still using multiple synths to get some more variation in the sound. Because usually these sequencers would limit you to one synth that you would put right after the sequencer, right? But what if you want to have a bit more melodic variation? This technique certainly allows you to get that. So now it's more about just tweaking the individual layers, switching through presets on our 4 receive tracks until we get a sound that sounds melodically interesting. And again, you don't necessarily need to use Diva. You can also use Ableton stock sounds. One of my favorite ones, as you probably might know, is Saw Pure Muted Bass by Analog. Just chuck that in here. And if you put your MIDI pitch device after Hocket 2, you can also change the octaves. Let's say if you want to play this down an octave, you can then hit Shift arrow down. Or if you want it to play up 2 octaves, you can also pitch it up, like Shift arrow up twice. Nice. And the cool thing is that you can also process your individual layers differently. I'm going to load up echo on the 4th layer here. Maybe change the frequency range, dial up the feedback a bit, leave it on dotted eighth note, perhaps give it a bit of reverb, set it to ping pong. Nice. But it still sounds pretty random, and I find that there isn't a lot of direction to the sound itself. So if I wanted to give it a bit more melodic structure, I can just change these shapes over here and start tweaking the sequencer a bit more. And usually I just like to randomize the notes until I get a melody that I like. You can also randomize the range here, to set the range again. And if you, let's say, are not into the minor scale and you're more of a Phrygian type person, you can select the Phrygian scale over here and it'll give you a melody that sounds slightly more oriental. You can also set the speed over here. You can change the direction to back and forth, the snake shape. Maybe change the steps down to 8 so we get more of a consistent melody. And the cool thing is that you can also change the direction of the MIDI that is sent out to the individual tracks by changing it here. You can also change it to reverse, random, or pendulum. Pendulum gives me interesting results as well. Get those Sébastien Léger type melodies, which is interesting. And you also get this extra panel over here that you can open and change these values over here to make the notes repeat, but I haven't really spent any time on this. So yeah, feel free to just try yourself out and come up with interesting notes. And you don't need to limit yourself to the MDD Snake sequencer. There's a ton of different sequencers by Max for Live. For example, one of my favorite ones to use is also Rozzer. So what you can do is load this one right after the MDD Snake, disable the MDD Snake, MDD, and start randomizing the parameters on your sequencer here. So just hit random on all. Right now it's set to C chromatic. Let's change it to C Persian. Jede. Interesting. But I'm going to stick with the first sequencer for now, the MDD Snake. Now if we play that together with our drum groove. There's a ton of individual sounds that we can use from that melody. But again, you can go back to your synths and tweak your settings. For example, if you change the cutoff on layer 2, go to layer 3 then, change the cutoff here to a higher value, you get different tonalities. What you can do as well is, let's go back to layer 1. You can group the diva by hitting Command G, you create a group, open up this macro panel over here. Then we're going to unfold the device parameters so we get to configure, hit configure, go back into the main panel and just start clicking yourself through the most important parameters of the synth, which is usually cutoff, the envelope 1 and 2, the filter and amplitude envelope. Just click your way through this preset over here, maybe VCO 1, VCO 2, click on that, close. Disable configure, and now you can start mapping your individual knobs to the macros. So I'm just going to do that here. I've now mapped every single one of these parameters to the macros on this instrument rack. And what I'm going to do is hit plus to open up all the macros so I can see every one of them and start tweaking my parameters here. Start tweaking the frequency, sustain, or if you don't feel like doing this manually, you can also hit randomize over here. Maybe change the tune up a bit. Play that with the other layers. And you can mix along the way, which means you can determine the overall volume that each and every single one of these voices or MIDI tracks has, which allows you to get more control over the overall tonality of the sound. And you can also mute out individual layers if you find them to be too much and you want to get a more minimalistic sequence. Let's say on layer 4, I don't like the saw pure muted bass, so I might delete that. And you can load any other synth you like. For example, I use Omnisphere a lot because I feel like the sounds that it gives me are pretty organic. So I might go into synth short because we're already in a very plucky mood here and just choose a different sound. Yeah, nice. And the creative possibilities for this are truly endless. If you dive into this, mess around with these individual settings, you can get so many interesting results that sound very cool. And if you want to record your results, there's two ways to do so. You can either create an audio track, hit resampling, record arm, and solo the individual tracks here. By hitting command, you can solo multiple tracks at once without soloing one track, by the way. And you can just hit record. Let it play through a bit. Let's say that's enough. So I'm just going to delete the end. And now you can loop a certain sequence. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. Loop. And make sure to disable all the other MIDI tracks. We're just working with audio now. Set a different loop range here. Maybe set a loop length of 3 so we get more polyrhythms. Oh. Let's add an echo from previously to this layer. Let's see how it sounds then. I'm getting goosebumps. And you can take your audio, duplicate it over, maybe set the second layer to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 halftone steps, which creates a more harmonious result because it's a perfect fifth. Maybe change it to Complex Pro, dial down the envelope, and set a different range here. By setting this flagpole post, which I like to call it, to a different section, you get different rhythmic results. Also pitch it down an octave, so now we're still at a perfect fifth, but pitch down -5 semitones instead of +7. And then just loop it up like that. Lovely, 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 lovely results. And if you'd like to record the MIDI from your tracks, you can then hit Command-Shift-T to open up a MIDI track, record arm, and either take the MIDI from the send, so you can set it here in the input section, send. And now you'd be recording the MIDI from the first send device over here. And if we hit record, you can see that it takes the MIDI from the entire sequence. So the MIDI that is being output from the send sequence over here, from the specific MDD Snake sequencer, is being recorded here. But let's say we don't want the entire sequence to be recorded and we just want the individual layers. Therefore, we have to create MIDI tracks for the individual receive layers. Receive 2, receive 3, and receive 4. I'm also going to rename these accordingly. So we have structure. In these MIDI tracks, we want to set that here accordingly. So in the input section, receive 2. On receive track 3, we want to do the same. On receive track 4, also take the MIDI from receive track 4. Now make sure to record arm these 3 individual layers. And now let's hit record. Nice. This means that you can take the MIDI and put it onto the according MIDI tracks. So let's say receive 2, receive 3, and receive 4. You can now disable the MDD Snake sequencer and the Hocket devices since we're not using them. We're using the MIDI now. And you can see if I solo these individual layers, it will now play the MIDI that we've resampled, which is just absolutely fantastic. You can take the first layer and just tweak these settings over here, maybe add a few notes and just have a bit of fun. Maybe you can combine 2 MIDI sequences only, like this 3rd and 4th one, or the 2nd and 3rd one, or 2nd and 4. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to make sure to drop all the links from these devices in the description below. Also, if you like these sounds, you can grab them on LotusTunes. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.